Hello, friends, and welcome to this episode 12 of the UnSunday Show. It means a lot to me that you're here with me again today. Hey, in this episode, I talked with a couple of my friends. I had a sit-down conversation via Skype with Rocky Glenn and Jim Gordon, two of my friends with similar stories in terms of having left the institutional church setting, not because they've left Jesus or feel like they've needed to abandon the faith, but they just feel like there's better expression of what the Ekklesia is to be outside of those four walls. And so our stories are similar in many regards. So I asked them to come on and have a conversation with me about what prompted them to leave the institutional church and what their experience has been in finding community after having left that setting. We had a great conversation in this episode, and I hope that you're encouraged by it as you listen. So thanks again for joining me, and here's episode 12 of the UnSunday Show. Hey friends, thanks for joining me on the UnSunday Show. This is episode 12 of the UnSunday Show. We're moving right along. And man, I really appreciate all the response that I'm getting from y'all and all the downloads that I'm getting. It's kind of amazing to watch this thing grow. You know, this is the Lord's doing, because I haven't really advertised it very much. It's out there a little bit, but it seems to be word of mouth. And I really enjoy, things going word of mouth because it's from people to people. It gets people involved. And that's really kind of my preference. And trying to get on social media and push things really hard, it just seems more organic, I guess, to me, when it's more word of mouth. So I really appreciate everyone jumping in and supporting, the notes you've sent me and supporting me in this endeavor. It means a lot to me. Hey, today we've got something really cool brewing. I'm not alone. It sounds like a sci-fi show or something. We're not alone. But today I am literally not alone. I have two of my friends with me. I have Rocky Glenn and Jim Gordon are connected here via the technology of Skype. And I asked them to join me today and share a little bit about what's going on with them. So, hi, guys.
Hey, hello. Mike.
How we doing?
Doing great.
I got one of you from Tennessee and one of you from Ohio. So, at least you're in the same time zone.
That's correct. Having a good day.
That's good. That's good. I want to ask you guys just to introduce yourselves one at a time. Kind of tell us a little bit about who you are in case somebody doesn't know who Rocky Glenn or Jim Gordon are. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and your home life and, family and so forth. Take it wherever you want to go. If you could just take a couple minutes and introduce yourself. Rocky, let's start with you, buddy.
Sure. Great to be talking to you again today, Mike. Basically, I was raised in church. I tell people I cut my teeth on a church hymnal, if you will. I remember being at church from the time I was 3 all the way up. Followed me through high school. It was just something, a part of my life, something we did. Musically inclined, played a lot of instruments. Because of that, I've been involved in many worship bands, playing piano, drums, bass, singing. At one point even started preaching and teaching Sunday school. If there was a job in the church other than, I even fulfilled the role of board member at once. So if there was a job in the church, I pretty much held it except for a senior pastor. About 2012, my wife and I attended a worship leaders conference in Atlanta, thinking, as you would in the church model, that you'd attend a conference, you'd get revived, you'd come back renewed, ready to take the world by storm. And that's really not what happened after that. A couple months after we were back, I got sick, had to have some surgery. I was hospitalized. And the Lord really took that time to pull us away from things and give us time to pause and think and reconsider. And just as I was coming and recovering out of that time of sickness, we felt the call to leave the church we'd been a part of for 10 years, a church we'd taken our youngest kid in, car carrier to. That was a difficult decision. We thought we were to the point of just finding another church, but through the next several years, as we looked for church homes and as churches we were part of started to move on, merge with other churches, things like that, we started really questioning why we were doing what we were doing. Let me back up just a minute. When we left that church home of 10 years and we settled at another church a lot quicker than we thought we would, we discovered the gospel of grace. And that's what really opened our eyes and changed our lives. Being raised in church, it was so much of, I think you've used the term before, behavior modification.
Oh, yeah.
Type thing. It's all about how you act and what you do and trying to notch up achievements or things of that nature. It's all about what you do instead of just being loved for who you are and just because you are and just because that's the way God created you. So the gospel of grace just totally wrecked our lives in a good way.
Yes,
in
I
a
understand.
good way. It just destroyed everything our lives were built on, but I wouldn't have it any other way now. Realizing that it's okay to be who you are because it's exactly who God made you to be.
That's right.
And it's been a huge change for us. We left the institutional church. I'd say finally cut ties in 2016. About that time, I started writing a blog, Confessions of a Recovering Church Boy, because I wanted to share my story of how I thought I was doing good. I was obeying the rules. Paul even says at some point, if anybody could achieve it, he was the greatest Pharisee there was. He could have achieved it. And that's the way I felt in my church life. If anybody was going to make it in, I was going to make it in because I did everything right.
Right.
And to come to find out that it was meaningless and that wasn't what mattered. And after debating it for about 6 months, talking to my wife about it, she said, you should write. So I started writing. It's been an interesting journey the last 3 years. Really has.
Sounds like it. I'm looking forward to delving into that more and, kind of fleshing that out a little bit more and getting more of the detail. It was a year ago this month, Rocky, that we met face to face. Let that sink in.
It was.
It was a year ago this month.
A rainy Sunday morning in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
That's right. And you guys showed up and we had, I don't remember if it was lunch or breakfast. I think it was lunch. We had lunch together. That whole day was it's kind of a blur. It was rushed. There was a lot going on. So, but yeah, we finally got to meet. One thing I didn't say at the beginning of this podcast is on my previous Ekklesia podcast, I interviewed you and we had a segment together on it. I should resurrect that and stick it out here at some point, and let people hear a little bit more about you. But I guess resurrect is a good word this time of year,
Oh, absolutely. Very timely.
It's a good time of word. It's a good word any time of year. So Rocky, how about now? I mean, what are you doing family wise? And, tell us about your kids. If you got kids, do you have grandkids? Do you have,
Oh, no grandkids, no grandkids. 17-year-old and a 13-year-old. Grandkids are a long way out of the picture, Mike.
That's good.
17-year-old son who just as musical as I am. Very proud of him. And then a 13-year-old daughter who is every bit the teenage princess this early in the teenage years as she wants to be.
Yeah.
Shannon and I have been married. We've been we celebrated 21 years this past December.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. High school sweethearts. And, we just wake up every day, and not every day we say we're happy, but just multiple conversations over the weekend. Sure. We've got a great life, and it's great to be able to recognize that. And I've got to give the credit once again to the gospel of God's grace.
Amen to that.
Because when you're in that system, you just don't feel that way a lot of times.
No, you don't. You feel weighted down and burdened. And no doubt we'll come back to that topic here in a few minutes too. So on the other end of the mic there is Mr. Jim Gordon. He's just waiting patiently for me to get to him and let him introduce himself. And so, Jim, the floor is yours. The microphone is yours. Tell us a little bit about who Jim Gordon is.
Well, I have to say I'm probably following along a lot like Rocky's story. I grew up in church. I think I was in church before I ever even realized I was there. I think my parents probably took me from the first day I was available to go outside. And I grew up in the system. It was the only thing I knew. I thought I was doing the best thing I could do to know God and follow God. I was probably just about as involved. I did play drums and piano for junior church. I helped in junior church. My dad was a lay leader, Sunday school superintendent. My mom always worked in the office. It's like we were just next to the pastor. It seemed like we were well known and always involved in something. Every time the doors were open, it seemed like we were there. The issue got to be, and I'm almost embarrassed to say it, but there was a point where I got the thought thinking I might be one of God's favorite people. What a thing to think, really looking back on it. But even my friends at school called me Honest Abe. But so yeah, it got to be a big head thing there. But in time, I just got to having this feeling, some reason or other, something didn't seem quite right. I couldn't put my finger on it. And it got to a point where I figured, well, it must be time for a change. Maybe I need to go to another church, find another pastor or something like that. So in time, we would, my wife and I, we'd move around to this church, that church, and be satisfied for a while. And all of a sudden, I just started noticing something don't seem right here. I don't know what's going on. It was a battle for years. I was in the system. I thought that was the way it was to be. I thought I was serving God the best I could do. But there was always that nagging thought in the back of my head, something just doesn't seem right here. I don't know. I just couldn't put my finger on it. But it seems like in time, I started hearing different people talk, different books I came across. Started thinking there's more to this than just going to church every Sunday. If I'm living for God, who's the God of the universe, there's more to it than just sitting in a church service for an hour a week, looking at the back of somebody else and leaving and not doing anything else the rest of the week. And I know everybody's different. A lot of people are more involved, but it seems like when you're involved in the system, it's just a bunch of meetings and things to do. But what really good is it doing sometimes? I just really felt really unsatisfied. And my wife and I had discussions about that several times. She knew I was unsatisfied, but she didn't know what to do to help either. And it just took a while, but we eventually thought, maybe it's time just to back off, to stop going for a while and see where that leads. So eventually that's what happened.
Okay.
And with my kids, we have 5 kids. They're all married. I'm not like Rocky here. I got 13 grandkids. A little bit different there, but they keep us busy and we enjoy it. But I had to talk with each of the kids to let them know we're leaving church. We're not leaving God.
Right.
God is with us each and every day. We don't have to go to a building once a week and hope he shows up to meet with God. He's with us right now every day. Every day is God's day. It's not Sunday's the Sabbath or the Lord's day. It's every day is the Lord's day. So I think in that sense, it just took a while. When you grow up in a system, you think this is it. That's all there is.
Right. Exactly.
And then, but I'd read different things. I remember reading in my Bible, there was a section between the New and Old New Testament called Between the Testaments, and I was reading it, and I thought, wow, if you want to ever question the Bible, read this section, because it brought a whole bunch of questions to my mind, how our Bible even came to be. So,
right.
But when you're in a church, you don't ask questions like that.
No.
Because if you do, people start saying, "Oh, you're backsliding, or you're losing your faith." So I just kind of put it all under the rug and forgot about it. Although deep down it kept bugging me, and I knew in the back of my mind something wasn't right. So, like I say, eventually it got to the point where we just decided we're going to back off and leave and stay out of the system for a while. And I have to say it's been a good thing for us. We've come to see grace, like Rocky talked about, in a greater degree, and understand it. There is more to living for God than just the religious side of it. I certainly don't want to make people that's still involved in a church feel like they're wrong or they're bad. They're not. It got me to where I am today. I learned about God. I came to know him through that system. But I think now I'm looking back, I think the system is flawed and not really what God intended it to be. And there is a better way, which we are still in the process of living day to day at this point.
Sure. I appreciate that. I appreciated your remarks there about not being able to question things when you're in that setting, because right. It does restrict you. It seems that, I don't want to sound weird when I say this. I don't know how to say it without sounding weird, but, we discovered more freedom outside of that, institutional setting that allowed us to probe deeper. I don't know if deeper is the right word, but I guess to ask different questions, because there's like a set of questions you're supposed to ask when you're in it, that you shouldn't venture out of those questions when you're in it. But when you get out of that system, you're not encumbered by it anymore, and you can go beyond it, and you can start asking, I think, more relevant questions, relevant to what's really going on in your life. And you get to start taking off the masks and being real. Would you say that was kind of your experience?
That's exactly it, because it is a mask. You go. It seemed like every Sunday you would go, and you're expected to act a certain way, and sometimes it's not even spoken out right, saying, but it's just a feeling in the background. It's just expected. I always expected to see everybody happy, everybody getting along together, no one getting mad, and that's not life. That is a mask, and questions, especially. If, I know the pastor was happy to ask for me to ask certain questions, but there are certain questions he wasn't happy about and didn't want to deal with. And there's a lot of people like that. There's a certain line you follow, and if you get past that line to the extreme one way or the other, then there's problems. People want to deal with you. They don't want to answer those questions, or they might start avoiding you in the stores. So yes,
that's right.
Yes, it is definitely. I like that the mask. Yes, very much so.
Yeah, the implied expectations. I like the fact that you hit on that, Jim. The expectations were never really stated; they were just more implied than anything.
That's good.
Exactly.
And that's what created the burden. That's what kept you pressed down, because and it was more through I know ministers that would say more with their eyes and with an eye roll or just a glance that. If you question them specifically, are you expecting me to do this? They would deny it, but you knew the expectations were there.
Right. And even your friends sometimes, now I feel like I think Jesus accepts all people, and I feel I can do that too. Now, I don't care what anybody else thinks of them. I just love people, but when you're in the system, it seems like if you associate with certain people, whether it's someone outside the church or even a different denomination, that you're looked down on for it. I do feel that freedom now of just being able to love people no matter who they are, what walk of life they're in, whether they're Christian or not.
And that's something you can't give people until you accept it yourself.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah, because in that system, it tends to get kind of tribal.
Right.
Yeah. They're not of our tribe, and so... we're not really interested. We'll be nice to them, but
exactly. How many times have you been? Yes. How many times have you been in a particular church group, and everybody acts like you're best of friends, but then all of a sudden you say, "Oh, I'm going to go to this other place. I feel like I need to move on," and you never hear from them anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. That's the experience of so many people. Us included.
Right.
That's just how it works, I guess. You go from one tribe to the other, I guess, is kind of how it's viewed. And I don't know. That's sad. It's really sad, but it's true.
Yes, it is.
It's true. Rocky, let's circle back around to you for a second. You mentioned earlier that you guys left the institutional church setting in 2016. You've talked a little bit about what led up to that, but tell us a little bit about that departure and what the circumstances were and what happened when you left, and if that's okay. I mean, you don't have to get specific with names and stuff like that, but, if you'd like to talk about that, this is your opportunity.
Absolutely. I mentioned to get to 2016, I truly have to go back to 2012 when we left the church that we'd been at for so long. Our last Sunday at that church, I was worship leader at that church. And as we walked in the door that morning, let me stop right there. I would not be where I am right now without the support of my wife. Mm. I was raised in the evangelical church, for lack of a better term, and the church every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. She was not. So she felt more of a freedom to it. You guys were talking about questions. She felt more of a freedom to question things than I ever did. And the fact that she and I were together and we were able to discuss things and things like that, I wouldn't be where I am. I'm able to ask some of the questions and ponder some of the things I now ponder if it weren't for her. Going back to the story, that last Sunday morning as we walked in, there were steps leading up to the sanctuary. And each step was literally, I cannot do this anymore. And we thought it was, like I said, it was just that church. I had prayed, unbeknownst to her, this was in June, but I had prayed at the beginning of the year Lord, I'm tired. I'll give it to the end of the year, and that's all I've got. The next 2 days following that Sunday was a time of great discussion, a difficult time in our house. It was a painful time in our house. A lot of tears, a lot of confusion, a lot of frustration. And finally, that Tuesday evening, we sat at the table and I told her, I said, okay, if we need to go, then you need to pray God will release us and we'll go. Being that we're on Skype, you guys can see the nice, coolish hairstyle I have that I maintain. I literally remember the next morning, that Wednesday morning, having the hair clippers right here on my head. And God said, as I looked in the mirror, it's time. I will never forget that. We've moved out of that house, but I ever remember that scene in my head. But we left there, and being a musician and playing for 20 plus years at that time, my one goal was I did not want to find a church to attend just so I could play music.
Right.
I didn't want to do it out of selfish ambition. We found a home church, or found a church that we had both been kind of listening to a guy's sermons off and on individually on the web. So we knew that's the next place we were going. We ended up landing there, and within 6 to 8 weeks, I was back on stage playing music, which was a blessing. I played with a great group of guys for the next year and a half. There were 4 of us that made up the core of the band. We had singers that sang with us, but there was a bond and a brotherhood that I got there. That church merged with another church. We saw it as a time to move on. Mm-hmm. And over the next 9 to 10 months, we tried 3 different churches or fellowships to be a part of. The final one we rested at, we were there probably 6 to 8 months, and it was literally like Jim said, you go and you sit there thinking, I'm just staring at the back of this person's head.
Yeah.
It was such a place that, the greeter, because you'd have different greeters because everyone had their schedule and assigned jobs and everything, because it's so much ran like an organization. If you had a different greeter at the door this week than you had the previous 2 weeks, they'd greet you like you were a visitor. So wouldn't even know you were a part. Mm-hmm. After going there, like I said, about 6 to 8 months, maybe longer, it just, why am I here? And we were literally there for an hour, 15 minutes every week. We would go to the 9 o'clock service, so we knew we had a quitting time and can have the rest of our day to ourselves. So we knew they had to have everybody out so the 11 o'clock crowd could get in. So,
that's good. That's good.
But, it came a point to where church was just something we were checking off our list because it was something we felt like we had to do.
It kind of becomes an obligation.
Right. Absolutely. I think I shared with you previously, Mike, I had sat down. I guess we were there longer than that because I maybe a little over a year, because I thought I'd be there a little while and then want to play music again. Mm-hmm. As I finally, after the turn of the year, scheduled a time with the worship leader to have dinner with him, I think I talked him more out of letting me play music than being a part, because it was a chance for me to be honest.
Sure.
And I shared with him, I got to be honest. I'm sitting here asking, why are we doing this? To the point of the format of a church service. Who says we have to have 3 songs and then an offering and then a lecture? I think Wayne Jacobson calls it quite fondly a mini concert followed by a lecture. And, that's what it ends up being.
It's so predictable.
So, it is. It is.
There toward the end, when we were still there, I'd always go thinking, man, surprise me with something.
Yeah.
Surprise me.
Thanks to the advent of cell phones, it was very easy not to keep your attention on what the guy was saying.
That's right. Check your Twitter feed.
But you got to make sure your kids are paying attention and taking notes, even though you're playing solitaire on your phone, But it was the final straw for us, and I know I've shared this with you previously, but I think it holds so much weight. The final straw for us, like I said, referring back to Shannon, is just that we didn't want to cut ties for our kids. And finally she said, if we are so certain we're doing it wrong and we weren't getting it right, why are we insisting on keeping them there? That was such a liberating statement. Like I said, we've been out for 3 years now. I never thought I would end up here. But I wouldn't change a thing. I've had conversations with both kids since we've been out of church. How do you feel? Do you miss church? Let's just be honest about it. And well, I miss seeing people, but I didn't like sitting there while the guy up on stage was talking,
Yeah.
And how can we, you may say, well, that's a harsh thing to say for a teenager, but if you take an anonymous poll, I would guarantee you 97 to 99%, if not higher, of the church attenders across the world would say the same thing. They're just sitting there listening to a guy talk.
Yeah.
There at the end, leading worship music was a big part of me. We get to the point, where even the worship songs we sing, come, Lord Jesus, fill this place with your presence. It's been so long I can't even remember exact lyrics, but we're begging, we're pleading for God's presence to come. And like Jim said, God's presence is with us every day.
That's right. He's already there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's just waking up to that realization. It's amazing. Yeah. I've had conversations with my dad. My dad's been an evangelist my whole life. I never thought I would have the conversations with him that I do. And when I get to the point to where I ask him questions of things I've been taught my whole life, and he'll look at me honestly and say, son, I can't tell you where it says that. I can't tell you why we did that.
Yeah.
I've shared with people in the past in conversations, and what drew me to you, Mike, was when I first stepped away. And I know I've shared this story before, but I think it bears repeating. When I first stepped away, got into the world of podcasts, and I looked for podcasts on grace.
Mm-hmm.
I found your old Chief Center podcast, which became known and loved, and now the Grace Cafe. And the fact that you, being a former minister, were asking the same questions that I was asking.
Yeah.
And in the time since, countless former ministers, former people who did what I did, who did what you did what Jim did. There's too many of us coming to the same conclusion for I truly need to believe for it not to be of God. I think God is setting us free. When we went to that church that we were at after the church we left of 10 years, when the guy first started preaching grace, I didn't agree with his messages. It was a new message for me. He'd be up on stage speaking, and I'm sitting back there flipping through my Bible trying to proof text him wrong, and I couldn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand. Yeah. I really appreciate your story, Rocky, on so many levels. I can relate to it. And I know there's a lot of other people out there listening that can relate to it as well. You mentioned the idea of it's just not real. It's not real relationships. I forget how you worded it. I wrote it down here. Oh, the idea about greeters and the organization. And I pinned in here that it's just predictable. You said that there's people that have their jobs, and, there's this organizational strata that's there, which really, to me, in my opinion, is a big hindrance to genuine community. But let's turn a corner here for just a second.
Okay.
And let's talk about your experiences after having left the institutional setting, your experiences in finding community. Good, bad, and ugly. And Jim, let's let you start this one off if you don't mind. Just kind of have a conversation about what it was like for you to find community outside of the institutional setting. What were the ups and downs? What were your struggles? Well, what are your struggles if they're still there? And kind of what are you facing? How was that for you, and how is that for you?
Well, it is a struggle. I have to admit. When you're used to sitting in a service, whether you're not really participating or not, you're sitting there with hundreds of other people. So you do develop some friendships, and you always feel like you have someone around you. I found that once leaving the system itself, we're in the minority. Although I am finding over time, there's more and more people who are going through the same struggles, asking the same questions. People has left the system. and they're saying, "What do we do now?" I know when my wife and I first left, our first thought was, well, let's find a home group in a house somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But the more we thought about it, a lot of the house groups or home groups were just an extension of the organized church, and it was a lot of them were even run by the church. They had to follow their rules and had to have the people approved who could actually lead the group.
Right.
So we are. I mean, it's not an easy. Anybody that leaves the church who's been in it, I have to say, it's not an easy thing to do to find the fellowship we think of from the past. We have run into people accidentally. I remember my wife and I sitting in a little cafe in town, and we just overheard a conversation of two guys sitting beside us, and I said, "Hey, that sounds like us." They were discussing how the church was so off base, and they were so unhappy. And then we asked one of them a question, and then we're all talking. I found for me that right now, the best thing my wife and I, between the two of us discussing our feelings and our thoughts, and we found a lot of, such as you two, people online, podcasts, books. Probably our biggest fellowship right now is online fellowship, and it's probably maybe not the best, but right now it's really good. I don't want to get into something that's not going to be any different what I was in, just to say I'm in a group. I know there's
just an obligation.
Yeah, it is, I think I've said to someone, you can leave the organization, but getting the organization out of you is a different story.
Right.
I've noticed a lot of times in my conversation, I'll be talking to someone, and some of the wording from back when I was involved in the church system, it's just there. I mean, just saying church, we know church is not truly a building. It's us. It's the people.
Right.
It's the called out ones that lives daily with God. But I still say, when I always say church, because we're so used to talking about a building we go to once a week.
That's right. That's exactly right.
It's difficult. It's more difficult to get the system out of you than it was to get to leave the system itself.
That's a great statement.
Yeah. And over time, I mean, we had one pastor, and I'll say right now, Mike, when I hear a pastor who has come to this realization and he's left his job, he left his livelihood, that says something to me. I mean, for my wife and I, our kids were older at that point. They were on their own. We didn't have a real big difficulty in leaving because there was nothing really holding us there. We knew it was time to move on, but I understand, Rocky, with you, it was a harder decision when you got kids still there. So I just say, when someone makes a decision like that as a pastor or with kids involved, and you know it's not right, and make the decision to leave, that really talks a lot to me. It says something good. But it was one of those points, again, nagging in the back of your head. Something's not right here. Something's not right.
That's right. You know, when you mentioned, the church is a building, and I guess on some level, that's an accurate definition of the word church. I mean, when you look in the New Testament, the word that we translate church, like you said, is Ekklesia, which is a compound word that means called out people. At its core, it means called out people, right?
Right.
But it's most often translated, or most often has the meaning of an assembly or a congregation. And the old English word for church, which was developed later, probably 6th century or so, and it comes from a German, an old German word. And I'm not going to get into all the technical stuff of that, but it literally meant a Lord's possession or a Lord's house. It actually referred to a building or a group of buildings. It actually referred to real estate. Mm-hmm. And so when we say church, we are, I guess on one level, sadly, talking about real estate. But when we think about church, the first thing that pops into our minds, and it happens to me all the time, is a church building. Oh, look at that church. I think, well, okay. And then I have that discussion with myself. Yeah, that's a church building, but that's not the Ekklesia.
Right.
So I have like four out of 5 voices in my head, are saying that's not the Ekklesia. But it's that same thing, because church, church does refer to a Lord's house, an old English word, an English Lord, a Lord's house, a Lord's possession. I think of William Tyndale, who gave us the first English Bible. A big part of the reason that he was strangled and then burned at the stake was his refusal to translate Ekklesia the way that the king wanted him to translate it and the way that the Pope wanted him to translate it as church. He refused to do that. And he said, no, it's an Ekklesia. It's a congregation. Wow. So, those in charge killed him. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. He paid the ultimate price. I think it's worth making a distinction. I think it's worth noting that there's a big distinction between the Ekklesia and the modern institutional church setting. And saying that, I don't want to alienate those in the modern church setting. I mean, I realize, Christ's Ekklesia is huge. His Ekklesia is everywhere. Right. And there's different expressions of it. And so I don't want to, sound like I'm trying to pick a fight or anything. But I do think it's important to point that out in this conversation. Like you said, we think of church as a building over here, a location over here. We use Old Covenant terms to describe it. We don't use very many New Covenant terms. We use a lot of Old Covenant terms. There's the sanctuary. We think, well, where's Jim today? Oh, he's over in the sanctuary. I'm like, wait a second, we just use these terms. We have an altar. Why do we have an altar? That's an Old Covenant concept. What we have is a cross and an empty tomb. And I think that we get kind of jumbled up a little bit between Old Covenant, New Covenant, and Ekklesia and church, and we bring these terms over that really don't belong there, and it just confuses us more. But I'm the same way. I look at a building on the corner. Oh, look at that church. Or I want to go to church, and it's hard to overcome that. It's hard to get away from that, I guess.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
A lot of levels. It's so cultural. It's so culturally ingrained in us to think that way.
Oh, yeah. And I think anybody who is going through this, anybody who has left, it is easy to get discouraged and think, well, what do I do now? There's nobody here. I'm just going to go back. But I think if you come to the conclusion that it's time to leave, then you need to stick with that decision, because there are people out there. Time, I'm finding more and more people who feel just like I felt. And that's so comforting when you find someone, it's like, wow, I'm not crazy.
That's right.
Someone actually feels like that. And they are out there. And I just tell people to pray, ask the guidance of the Holy Spirit to lead them to the people in the right timing, the right place. They are there.
That's right. Would you guys say that our definition or our ideas of community are a little skewed just because we've been in the institution for so long? We kind of have an institutional definition of what community looks like, and we expect to carry that with us when we leave.
I think community, and I think that's a great point. I think community just happens right in front of you. Community can happen with the cashier at the grocery store. Community can happen with the waitress or the server at the restaurant. It's just a matter of taking time to be right in that moment. I think the fact that the organization did skew our sense and definition of community, I think that's a great way to look at it. We just recently had an experience at the grocery store a couple weeks ago where we just asked the lady how her day was as we were going through her line. And she says it's better than yesterday. And she starts telling us how she walked in the door and a customer just insulted her because she didn't look well enough to work there the day before. It was heartbreaking on two cases because you feel for the cashier talking to you, telling that story that someone treated her that way, and realizing that something stuck in her mind that a stranger had done to her for 24 hours earlier. To me, in that moment, sitting there listening to her and speaking to her and just allowing her to share her story, that's community in that moment. Community happens in the workplace as you get to know your coworkers over time, and there's things in their lives that maybe they share with you they don't share with others. That's community.
Yeah.
got this sense that we're supposed to find this great big thing that we're supposed to do, and the mystery of God's will, and what do you want me to do? God wants you to live in the moment right in front of you right now.
Yeah.
If that's with your wife and kids, or with your grandkids, or if it's with people sitting in a restaurant, just be in that moment. And I think that's what Jesus showed us. I think that's what Jesus showed us. He was in that moment.
Yes, he was. I think too, we bring in the idea that in the institutionally sanctioned setting, that this fellowship or this body life or this community or whatever we're going to call it can only happen on certain days of the week and in certain ways. The institution has to sanction what's going on, or it's not really valid. It's somewhat invalid, but we had a few years that were really dry when we left the institutional church, that you just couldn't find fellowship, really. You couldn't find it consistently. Well, and like Jim said, you pray and ask God to lead you, ask people to, ask him to lead others into your life and you to them. And over a period of time, we now have a handful of friends that we get with. We just live life together. We're not coming together, in some kind of an institutional setting, but we live life together. And, we're in each other's lives, and it's not 24/7. I've never looked at the back of any of their heads, but it's just friendships. It's just genuine caring.
I think community happens when you're not looking for it. Honestly.
Yes.
I think I shared, I got teenagers, both of you have raised teenagers, going through the teenage years and young love and everything like that. And you want your child just to focus on being you. And when the relationship's supposed to happen, it will happen. I think community's a lot of the same way. If we go out looking for it, I don't know that we're ever going to find it, but it just happens.
Yeah.
Both of you had mentioned, the dry spell or the time before you start finding others. I think that's important to share as well, because you do question, did I make the right choice?
Yes. Right.
It is lonely. It's painful at times. You feel all alone. You feel isolated. You feel like you're on an island.
Oh, yeah.
If you can just let people know, maybe we let people know through this, that time will come, but it will pass. And it's in that time where you learn God.
Right.
You learn who he is.
You learn that he's enough.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, I know for me, what you both said about community, when we're in the system, we're among people, but we're expected to sit there and be quiet and listen.
Right.
But community is, when the Bible says, when you come together, everyone has a word, has something to say. You think, well, how do you do that within a church service? Well, we don't.
You could try it.
We're doing it. Well, you could, but it might not be a good thing. But we're having a community right now.
Yes.
We're all having a
Absolutely.
word. We're all having something to say. And living life with people, whether they're fellow believers or outside as a believer. Communicating with them, showing them, like Rocky said, that cashier, just showing them God's love.
Right.
And yet without an ulterior motive of trying to convert them. Be real. Show your weaknesses.
That's right.
Let them know that you just want to be friends. You just want to
That's right.
fellowship together and talk together. You're not trying to convince them to change their beliefs or
That's right.
make any difference. You just want to be friends. I think that's true community. And it's whether it's 2 or 3 or 15, 20, whatever. I just believe that real community is we're all participating. We're all showing love to each other and just being real.
That's exactly right. That's a great point. Somebody once said that the most genuine community doesn't occur within the church service, but it occurs in the parking lot before and after. And I would say it probably occurs more after.
Right. I think so.
As you talk about where to have lunch.
Too many times we as a church have been our own worst enemy. I don't know if you guys can see it or not, but I'm sitting here wearing a Captain America shirt. In our house, we are big fandom people. Sci-fi, Marvel, WrestleMania's today. You guys kind of tease me about that, but I will be watching later. It's a big part of who we are. But because of that, once again, Shannon had an experience wearing a lanyard that had a Doctor Who logo on it, and instant connection to the cashier at a restaurant. You don't have that instant connection if somebody sees you wearing a Christian T-shirt.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
That's exactly right. Especially in a restaurant where you tip low and leave a tract.
Yes, we have a track record there.
Jim, were you going to say something? Did I cut you off there?
No, you did. I was that tip conversation. This old pastor of ours, who was very instrumental in actually getting us to start seeing things a little bit differently, amazingly or not. He always said, as Christians, what a bad witness that is when we go to the restaurant after church and stay for 2 or 3 hours talking community, and then leave the waitress $1 or $2.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
yeah, it is. But yeah, just I think I agree with you, Mike, about the after church or in the restaurant after church. Real community takes place more than actually in the service.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can't do the one another's in there. You can't do the one another's inside that building. You're there for a lecture. Everything points to the pulpit and ultimately the pastor.
Right.
You go in there. I mean, even during the week, even before you get into the building, things are pointing that way. I don't know about you guys, but I've mentioned this before too, I think, but in where we live, there's a lot of transient churches, that meet in schools and stuff like that.
Right.
And on Saturday nights, here come the sandwich boards. They're out on every corner. I don't know who puts them up. I never see anybody putting them up. They just appear. It's like a post-holiday miracle or something. Just poof, and they're there. But these sandwich boards go up, and they're all pointing. They all got an arrow. We're over here. We're here. You need to come in here Sunday. Here's our 3 service times this Sunday. Come in here. Come over here, and then you go to the website, and it's the same thing. Get in here. Get in here. And so then we might get brave and set foot inside one of those facilities. And as soon as you get in, everything points to the pulpit. All the seating points to the pulpit. It points to a pulpit that may be on a platform and probably is. And everything's geared toward that. There's like this focal point up there. And then ultimately, when the pastor or whoever gets up to speak and, do a 30 to 50 minute lecture, whatever it is, all of a sudden there's somebody behind the pulpit and now we're all pointing to that person. We've so institutionalized the pastor, a term that appears one time in the New Testament. We've taken that thing and we've made him or her the chief CEO in this corporation. And it is a corporation. It's a 501c3. It is a legal corporation.
Yes.
And this person we call pastor is the chief executive officer. Somebody's got to be because it's a corporation. And so there has to be someone acting as the head. And, that just kills the operation of gifts. Try going in one of those settings. And when you're in the middle of the lecture, if something is said that you question or that you disagree with, raise your hand. I have a question over here. Hold on a second. Could you say that again? What did you mean when you said, I disagree with that? I think that's out of context. Try that.
Right.
And see how far that gets us.
The usher will be there
and
quick.
if you're sitting there, if you're sitting there with a gift of teaching or some kind of a speaking gift, you don't get to use it. You have to just sit there and be quiet and do what I used to do. Like Rocky mentioned, he had his smartphone. I had my smartphone. I didn't play solitaire on it. I'd get on Twitter.
Yeah.
And I would tweet things that I was hearing, and I would like, whoa. Or I would just start interacting with friends on Twitter or Facebook or whatever. So I'm looking at the palm of my hand. Somebody probably thinks I'm reading my Bible, my electronic Bible, but I'm really just tweeting, because you can't use your spiritual gifts in a setting that is geared toward one person or a small group of people.
Right.
It cannot happen.
Yes, right.
And that is not genuine community. That's crowd control.
Exactly.
in my opinion. And I don't say that spitefully. I just think, the matter of fact, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And in how many times in the church you had that feeling you can't associate with certain people?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
you're within the church, you're fine, and maybe another church is similar to you. But what about all the labels we have today? Atheist, gay.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's like don't talk to them. You can't associate with them.
Yeah.
But it seems to me Jesus would associate with them, so why shouldn't we? So being outside the system, I just feel that freedom
That's
to
right.
accept people who they are, no matter what label they wear. They're human beings and they're loved by God.
Yes.
And that's our job to love others.
That's right. That's right. You know, guys, I think that's a great note to end on. And I know you guys have other things to do. And I don't want to keep you from those other things. I'd love to keep you from those other things. I could do this, the rest of the day. But I know there's a 3-hour time difference between us as well. So your day is kind of pressing on toward late afternoon. So I better let you go. I hate to, but hey, maybe we can do this again soon.
Would sound good to me.
Yes, I'd love to.
Yeah, I really
love
appreciate
speaking with both of you.
Appreciate you guys doing this with me. Before we go, if you guys would like to, tell us how to get in touch with you. I mean, as far as like Twitter, social media, do you guys have like Twitter handles, social media, Facebook, or something that you would want to throw out there and say, hey, I'm over here doing this? And
Well, I know for me, when I went through this process, I started writing also, a lot like Rocky. Just felt like putting my words. I usually do better writing than I do talking. So my wife said, well, why don't you just start writing your feelings? So I started writing with donewithreligion.com and on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, about every place I can be, you'll probably find me there.
okay.
It's just easy for me to write and put into my feelings into words than it is actually speaking them out.
Okay. So that's donewithreligion.com, right?
Correct.
Okay. Rocky, how about you? You got a website? You got something you want to throw out there to everybody?
I do. You can catch my blog at recoveringchurchboy.blog. Also kind of partnered with Jim and released some blogs on Done With Religion. So you can find them at either place. But as far as social media handles, you can find me at Churchboy No More. And that's on Twitter and Instagram, and I think Facebook too. I'm not sure if I've set that up, but I'm on all three, and that's at Churchboy No More.
Okay. And Susan and I both really appreciate what you guys write. I want to say that. I know Shannon, your wife, Rocky, put out a blog here just in the last day or two. I have to confess, I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but Susan was all over it.
It's
and,
good.
And
Awesome.
she says, this is so good. And we actually mentioned you, Rocky. We recorded an episode yesterday that posts this afternoon. And we mentioned you with your Brennan Manning quotes and how timely those are for us on social media. So, yeah, Susan got her voice back enough to where she was able to actually join me on an episode. And it didn't go too long because her voice started fading fast, but I was glad that she was back and we were able to have a conversation. So I just want you guys to know that we appreciate the both of you and, the things that you're doing and writing and saying. And, man, it means a lot. It's part of our community.
I appreciate that. If I could just say one thing, since we did talk about Done With Religion, Mike Edwards also writes for us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Good.
Yes.
He also writes for whatgodmayreallybeLike.com.
Yes.
And he's been a good addition. Rocky and Mike have been a great addition. I'm really glad that they agreed to write with Done With Religion. It's been a big encouragement.
That's awesome.
That was just one quick word on community. Obviously, like Jim said earlier, this is community right here, what we're doing.
Yes.
But when Jim spoke to both Mike and then I guess a week later spoke to me, I don't think any of the three of us realized the community and brotherhood we would actually form.
Right.
And that, it's more than just us posting what we write. There's communication going on via email during the week. It's just it's been an unexpected blessing, and like I said, community happens when you don't expect it to.
Exactly.
We should all get bumper stickers that say "Community Happens."
There we go. I like that.
Yeah, with that, I think I'll let you guys go. Guys, enjoy the rest of your day. Man, I appreciate you both so much, and thanks for doing this with me, and maybe we can do it again sometime, and maybe Mike can join us as well, and, we can make that happen and see how far technology holds up here and how the editing would go after that. So
Yeah, I'd love to. That sounds good.
All right, guys. Well, I will let you go, and thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having us. We appreciate it. Thank you, Mike.
You bet you guys.
Thanks, Rocky.
Bye. Well, there you go. There's episode 12 of the UnSunday Show. I hope that you found encouragement in it. Hey, you can find me online at unsunday.com. That's unsunday.com. I have a contact form on that website that you can fill out and send to me, and we can interact a little bit if you like. I'd like to hear from you. I'd like to hear about your story. And so feel free to use that contact form at any time. And until next time, goodbye.